Yes, my people, welcome in here to a CBS presentation of Numbers Don't Lie, powered by Sofascore. And we've been so close to Christmas, we thought we'd give you the gift that keeps on giving, that is Real Madrid. And the question marks around this man, one of the greatest minds in football, in Xabi Alonso, but is his time running out? And if I'm going to have this debate, you know I'm going to have it with my dog, my homeboy, my co-D. I like that, you can't see me. Nico Cantor. So Nico, I'm going to dive straight into this because Xabi Alonso is sitting on the hot seat of one of the best jobs in world football as Real Madrid head coach. But is his time running out?
Yeah, for Xabi Alonso, you could argue it is the best job in world football, right? Time is running out. The media is putting a lot of pressure on him. But let's look at the numbers and see where exactly Xabi Alonso is. La Liga table is pretty damning. The distance between Real Madrid and Barcelona, it's been Real Madrid up, Barcelona up. Right now, it's a 4-point spread. Villarreal, right now, you see them 4 points back. That's because they have 2 games in hand. So the odds say Barcelona has a 60% chance to win La Liga. Real Madrid is at 39. What does that leave, like 0.5% for Villarreal and Atletico Madrid? Listen, their form is not great. Let's take a look at their last 9 games. And the form is really what's putting Real Madrid under pressure, especially Xabi Alonso, because results are everything in this business, especially at a club the size of Real Madrid. It's just that one win against Olympiacos, which was a very difficult win on the road in Athens, and then against Athletic Club. This is arguably one of their better performances of the season.
100%.
But it's surrounded by a lot of red and a lot of gray. They just got back to winning ways this weekend, but it wasn't that convincing.
I think the question marks around the Celta Vigo performance was one, because now people start talking about the intensity. Are they buying into the system? Are the players even working for him? A couple of these away results, I think, has raised the eyebrow naturally over it, and you saw the out of form coming out of it. But Liverpool, of course, because of the insecurity they've had this year overall in terms of, and Manchester City is a completely different animal.
You can lose
overall.
Away at Anfield.
Of course you can.
You can't lose at home to Celta Vigo.
Doesn't work that way. And that's the problem. Now when you start to explore in terms of diving into the deeper reasons as to why Real Madrid are in these sort of problems overall, I think it starts to create the question mark around the recruitment, around the system, around Xabi Alonso overall. Is his messaging getting across in terms of to that team? But I want to know, just focusing on what he's delivered so far, do you think the scrutiny is fair?
Yeah, I do think the scrutiny is fair, because when you show up to Real Madrid, you need to evolve. You need to adapt. And he was managing a certain way at Bayer Leverkusen. And at Real Madrid, it's a different type of coaching. I mean, it's this whole debate about coaching and managing, right? It is a little bit different. And you see against Alavés, where finally, after the Manchester City game, you saw a team that was responding a little bit to what Xabi Alonso wanted. And then against Alavés, you got the result, but I wouldn't say that the performance was from start to finish convincing in the way that Xabi Alonso would have wanted. And there still is an air of doubt. Split possession. In fact, almost Alavés just edging them out. The XG, Alavés put you under pressure. Shots on target, sure, but the big chances were more in favor of Alavés. So again, questions still, because there is a long run into the rest of the season, especially I have an eye on the Super Cup coming up in January.
Always big games when you circle those in the calendar, but I can hear the fans at home immediately. What are you questioning? How have we gone from that invincible team of Bayer Leverkusen to where we are right now with this struggling Real Madrid system? And it's a completely different animal. You need to understand, when you sit on the hot seat for Real Madrid overall, you're under a different level of pressure, a different level of scrutiny, and what you can't allow is ball possession at any point to be dominated by a team like, and this is all respect to Deportivo Alavés, but they're not a Barcelona, a Man City, a Liverpool overall. So when you dive into the numbers, the wins, the losses, and we can see in terms of their form guide overall, you can really recognise the pressure that Xabi Alonso is under right now, because the wins are one thing. You're always going to be expected goals. You're always going to get wins as a Real Madrid manager. The quality that runs throughout your squad really does highlight as to why you are one of the best teams in world football. But it's the draws and the losses. And I want to bring everybody down to immediately the last graphic, because the big chances allowed is where we are really highlighting the big problem for Real Madrid. When they're under the cosh, when they're in games that are a little bit tighter, or they're not in as much control, all of a sudden it seems to unravel in terms of on the sidelines.
Yeah, I think the big chances allowed is the biggest one, like you say, JD, because when Real Madrid are winning, they're creating, it feels like they're on the ball, they're scoring first a lot of the time, but when they're not getting all 3 points, it feels like they're scrambling to figure it out. Sometimes it's salvageable, sometimes it's not. And this Madrid that's been lacking defensively, that hasn't had that type of order, especially, because they're lacking personnel recently rather than throughout the entire season, it's shown that they're beatable, that they're vulnerable. And that's what's more worrying about Real Madrid rather than the guys up top coming together and fitting. It feels like a guy like Xabi Alonso, that he's going to be able to figure out.
Yeah, I think when you really break it down and you especially look at these big chances, we're always expecting Real Madrid to be on the front foot. You always expect them to create shots. I think it's the opposite angle. When we start really looking at, as you said, the personnel, I automatically think of the gaps now that's left between Kroos and Modric in that midfield. Where's the replacement? Where's the charisma?
Right.
Where's the determination? Where's your leaders that's going to help this guy on the sideline? Because I know we give him a lot of praise. I know he's a big fan. You're a big fan of his overall. But he still needs leaders because he's technically a little bit of an inexperienced manager still. This is a job that is for someone who's probably a little bit 10, 15 years ahead. But because of how good he is, he's good enough to be there. Or is he? I'm going to ask you the question now. Do you still think in terms of his tenure should be longer at Real Madrid?
Yeah, I think we have to wait and see, right? I don't know how willing the board at Real Madrid is willing to wait and see. Let's compare to the start that Ancelotti had. The numbers are pretty similar. I mean, granted, Ancelotti was tasked to find a lot of solutions to the question that you were posing. What does Real Madrid look like beyond Toni Kroos? What does Real Madrid look like now beyond Luka Modric that they don't have anymore, right? They did have Luka Modric in the start of the 24-25 season. But the numbers are almost the same. I mean, in fact, he's doing better than Ancelotti was doing in Champions League. They're creating similar amount of big chances. They're creating more shots on goal per game. It's a little bit more, actually. But overall, what I'm saying is that the numbers are almost the same. Ancelotti obviously has much more credibility than Xabi Alonso. But I wonder if you grab it by a player perspective, right? Because that's the whole thing. Carlo Ancelotti, was a great manager of the dressing room.
Yeah.
Understood his players at his best. And there's a lot of questions about whether Xabi Alonso has lost the dressing room or not.
I love that question because I think that's really where we are right now in terms of opening up the discussion. And this is where we want you involved in the comments. Has Xabi Alonso still got control of that dressing room? Which I think is the hardest dressing room in world football to manage because you're not dealing with your typical high-profile players or players of a high quality. Every single player in that changing room believes that they should be starting. They understand the weight of the shirt in terms of wearing it and playing for Real Madrid. And more importantly, they're arguably the best player for their country. They're arguably the best player in their region.
Right.
Everybody has made a big deal of the fact that they actually represent Los Blancos and they're here now. And when you see them in terms of they're on top, you understand. That's when the fluidity comes out. That's when the confidence comes out. It's the other aspect. It's when they concede first, when they start to question the leadership and then the characters and then the tenacity and whether or not you can connect with your manager.
This is the one that's telling for me because they concede first, which is a possibility, and then you don't know what you're going to get. They could draw, they could lose, they could turn the result around. So what does Xabi Alonso do to get the most out of these players? Or what is he not doing enough to show that grit, that personality, that perseverance? It's obviously very early in the season. These numbers can change. And hopefully for Xabi Alonso and Real Madrid, they're not conceding first a lot, right? But in a Champions League game, when it does go up and down, I mean, we're talking about remontada, which has been like the title of Real Madrid in the Champions League as of late. Remontada happens because you're conceding first. And remontada can't happen if this is a complete unknown. A remontada has to happen because you concede first and there's belief you can turn it around. So what does Xabi do tactically? What decisions is he making from the sideline that's going to impact the game, and specifically with a couple of players to get the most out of them?
Let's never question in terms of why Xabi Alonso got this job, because regardless of what people say around the current tenure and the inconsistency in terms of their form, this is still a top-level manager who has produced some incredible feats across Europe already. So what we need to do is dive into and give the responsibility back to the players that wear that shirt week in, week out. And that's the form of terms of the players that are playing for Real Madrid. So when you bring on someone like Fede Valverde, and the only reason why we bring him up, first of all, is because he leads by example. He's always been a consistent factor, whatever position he plays in. But as you can see, see from not only the heat map, but also in terms of his stats overall from last season to this season, there's a drop-off. Now, this is a high-level drop-off because there was question marks about whether or not this was the best player in a position last year in world football. But the important factor we need to is that Xabi Alonso needs him now. He needs his dedication, he needs his leadership at this moment because this dressing room doesn't seem as connected as it should be. And when you wear the captain's armband like he does on a consistent basis, he has a higher level of responsibility.
To me, Fede Valverde has been Real Madrid's more critical player over the last couple of years. And he's lost him. This is the first season that I'm really questioning, wow, Fede Valverde has really dropped off. That was never an issue from the last, I'm talking about a handful of years, right? You always knew Fede Valverde was going to give you a certain amount of output, and he's not giving it to you. Not only that, he's playing in a position that he didn't like. Granted, last year he did play right back, but the ways that he's able to impact the game are further up the field in an attacking portion of the field, perhaps out wide, but higher up, where he can hit a ball from mid-distance, where he can whip it across, where he can arrive late in a late run coming in, and he's not being able to do that this season.
I want to switch to my UK brother right now because Jude Bellingham has also, I think, done something that not many people in terms of from a British perspective has ever done. Shout out to Laurie Cunningham. But overall, when you see the perspective of where he is from last year to this year, again, it's another question mark. Everything is in an element of decline. And then we start to ask the questions. This is the connectivity to the manager. Am I giving the dedication? Because the duels contested is nothing we've ever questioned from Birmingham City all the way through to Borussia Dortmund to now Real Madrid. In terms of the penalty area entries, again, they're on the decline. The Sofascore isn't too bad overall in terms of, but the standard that Jude has set for himself, do you think that the Real Madrid number 5 is producing what he needs to right now with his team on a decline?
Yeah, my question is, I think a lot of these numbers are impacted by the presence of Mbappe. If you look at Vinicius' numbers, his numbers are also declining when you compare to last season to this season, especially because Mbappe got off to a slow start. This year, it's been lights out. He's one of the best players in the world. So Jude Bellingham has also been injured a little bit, so the sample size isn't as large. And obviously, he's still trying to be the guy that he was in the very first season when he arrived at Real Madrid and he won the Champions League. And he was scoring a lot of the goals, and creating a lot of the assists. And people are wondering, is this sustainable over a longer period of time? And over a longer period of time, it shows that he can be the creative mastermind and the assist or the provider to a mega superstar, right? And when I say mega superstar, it's because Kylian Mbappe is putting up numbers that are absolutely ridiculous. But I guess your numbers still need to follow because it can't just be Mbappe dependent. Is that a recipe for success?
Another question mark, another wonder kid that me and you have spoken about and given his flowers to, Arda Güler. Because, when we talk about Turkish wonder kid, I always put him and I put Yildiz in the same sentence.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be in terms of incredible forces across Europe. Now, I know on this show, we spoke about him in terms of the way that he started this season, the fluidity he had, the creativity, the spark, how he was coming from the inside. He seemed to be that one player that was connecting the midfield and the attack really well and complementing Kylian Mbappe. That was the first 14 games. Now we go into the next 9 games. Again, Nico, the struggles are starting to show.
And this was more apparent, right? He's been losing his place in the midfield of Real Madrid. It felt like Arda Güler at the beginning of the season was the project for Xabi Alonso, the guy that was going to pull the strings, the guy that was going to kind of fill that that Toni Kroos size hole or Luka Modric size hole, whatever you want, the guy who's your metronome. And then he had a mistake against Atletico Madrid, and then he hasn't able to show up and be that definitive. He started to strike a good partnership with Mbappe, but it has kind of dimmed out a little bit. So with Jude Bellingham coming back into the mix, because remember those first 14 games was a lot of them, if not almost the most of them, were without Jude Bellingham, right? So I wonder if Arda Güler is ready for it in this time of turmoil, if he's able to shoulder that responsibility. So I'm not convinced that this is Arda Güler. I'm more convinced that is Arda Güler. But we still need more time, especially if there's no manager change. Hopefully we could see Arda Güler start to get a little bit more of that numbers and a little bit more of that production value that we saw at the beginning of the season.
The reason why we highlighted those is, of course, they're midfielders. That's number one. But remember what we said at the top of this, right? You're talking about the management of arguably the best players for their nations and now having to come and fit in to be a squad player around other Galacticos or superstars, as they say. That's the fine balance in terms of Real Madrid. So I'm going to ask you, finally, before we head off, has Xabi Alonso lost his change room and can he turn this around?
No, but it's a delicate situation situation, he can turn it around. But it's a matter of 1 or 2 more results not going your way. And for me, I think there's a junction point at the Super Cup, potentially a final against Barcelona. You lose that game and you're not convincing, forget about it.
I always say you can turn around and focus on the creativity, you can focus on the work rate, but the industry doesn't lie. And Xabi Alonso's got a lot of work to do, but you get involved in the comments. Let us know. Is Real Madrid going to turn this around, or the struggle's going to continue? And most importantly, numbers don't lie.
Hey, thanks for watching this video from Numbers Don't Lie. Be sure to catch our show every Monday at 5 p.m. on YouTube. And for news and insights from leagues all around the world, including Serie A, EFL, and all UEFA competitions, both men's and women's, don't forget to sign up for Paramount+.